My name is Scott Dill. I'm the business development manager here with the Real Story Group, and my colleague and our founder, Tony Byrne, will be on the line shortly to walk through the heart of the presentation. But I did want to provide you with a little bit of information about Real Story Group here as we get started, as I see a number of new names on the line with us today. So first and foremost, we're an analyst firm, and we publish detailed evaluations of over 150 solutions that fall into the digital marketing and digital workplace technology buckets. And the way we differentiate ourselves is the fact that we don't say, okay, here's the best and here's the worst vendor, but rather what's going to be the right fit for what it is you're trying to do. So we publish detailed research, but also provide you as a subscriber with tools to really develop a short list that's based on your specific use cases, and also see a side-by-side comparison of those selected vendors. We also offer a tool called Real Score, where you can benchmark your digital effectiveness and measure yourselves against your industry peers. And then if you want more high-level involvement from us, we can come on site and be an extension of your team as part of a consulting engagement, where we can either work with you on developing a strategic roadmap, or actually sit on the same side of the table with you through a technology selection project. Now, we've developed a bit of a reputation of being the toughest critics in the analyst world, and that's a reputation that we're actually particularly fond of. How we develop that is by not doing any work for the vendors that we evaluate. So we don't speak at their conference or write white papers for them, but rather we've taken a consumer reports type of approach to our research, and being completely neutral and being completely on the buyer side of the table. In terms of the markets that we cover, again, there's 8 larger markets around things like CRM, marketing automation, as well as web content management, digital asset management. And you'll see with our vendor technology map here, these are all the different players that we evaluate in those spaces. And what really makes us unique is not only do we cover the major platform type solutions, but also those best of breed players that you'll see on the outskirts of this vendor map. A couple quick housekeeping items of note here as we get started. If you have questions, we encourage you to ask those in the questions tab in the GoToWebinar control panel. And for our subscribers on the line, you'll be getting access to a recording of today's presentation. And then for everyone that's attending, you'll also receive the slides from today's session. So with that, let me turn things over to Tony Byrne.
Yeah, hello everyone. It's great to connect up with you again today. I wanted to start this with a little story of how I founded Real Story Group, originally named CMS back in 2001. I was looking at a systems integrator, and we were implementing some pretty big name content management, document management, and search solutions, things you would typically find in the upper right-hand quadrant of these sort of typical analyst matrices. And we were finding that many of these tools had really significant problems, and we were actually in many cases having difficulty, and the client was looking at us and saying, well, how do we have this problem here? We bought the tool that's in the upper right-hand quadrant. Surely the problem must be with you. And this is frustrating. And then when I learned how some of this sausage actually got made, I decided to do something different, to tell the real story from your perspective, from the buyer's perspective, about how these tools really work. And I think that's really a theme running underneath this whole webinar today, and around our whole selection methodology, is to really get real about this by really understanding what it is that you need. So without further ado, let's get into it. And I understand that there's maybe a little bit of difficulty with the audio, so I'm going to just move the mic a little bit closer. I hope that will help. All right, so let's talk about digital marketing. This is a typical kind of enterprise architecture slide. We use this as a reference model, a generic reference model with our subscribers. And, you know, it shows the different layers within your marketing and engagement stack, obviously starting with a data foundation at the bottom, but then very importantly, this kind of content and engagement management tier in the middle, which is those are kind of like anchor stores in your MarTech mall. Really important to get those right. And then of course, there's a whole profusion of other marketing and delivery services before you actually get your message out to your prospects and customers. So, it's really important to sort of have an architectural perspective on all of this, but also to sort of understand, okay, where's my center here? What's really important in which context? And even more, and so you've got to get this kind of multicolored part right. And we're going to be talking in particular about marketing automation today, about outbound marketing, but really the same lessons could be applied for digital asset management, web content and experience management, the more inbound engagement, and of course, social engagement as well. So one of the incredible things that we've seen over the past several years is what Scott Brinker from ChiefMartech.com calls the Cambrian Explosion of marketing technologies. And his most recent chart, you may well know, actually somehow squeezes 5,000 logos onto it. Now, we don't cover 5,000 vendors, as Scott mentioned. We tend to cover vendors who play in more of the global 5,000, mid to large size enterprises. But even then, that can be a wide variety of different players, including key open source tools. But the point here is that we know there's evidence out there that everybody's marketing stack is getting wider and deeper. That is, there's going to be more and more tools. So a couple of things fall out of that. One is obviously, you need a good overall architectural vision. And two, you have to make selecting technology a kind of a core competency, because you and I are going to be selecting tools in marketplaces 2 years from now that don't even exist today. And so we need to be able to, as a core competency, be able to identify and select the right tools that are going to be the best fit for us. Now let's focus on campaign lead management, marketing automation, the more outbound marketing capabilities. And these are the tools that we evaluate in our own MarTech research. You can kind of divide it into two rough categories. You've got the multi-product digital marketing cloud vendors, of course, Adobe, IBM, Oracle, Salesforce. And you've got a number of other more niche providers. Salesforce, of course, has a second tool, Pardot. You've got Future, Acton, Marketo, now privately held again. Silverpop, which is a little bit outside the IBM, the rest of the IBM ecosystem, although it has the fancy Watson name now. So clearly, you have a lot of choices here, both strategically and tactically. And so the question then becomes, how do I distinguish among all of these different types of vendors, and how do I figure out what's the best fit for me? A lot of times, people will focus on features. Does it do this? Does it do that? Does it do the other thing? And in our own evaluations, we certainly will identify and critique these platforms at a feature level. But the more important thing always is to look at business usage scenarios. What is it that you're actually trying to do? Because it turns out that different tools are highly specialized in in what they do well, as opposed to what they don't do well. So maybe able to set up their box and actually get them a question. And in fact, when we take a box like this, where you've got lead management and nurturing, you've got B2C, social engagement, mobile marketing, that sort of thing. There's a variety of different capabilities, and we're here to tell you there's no single tool that does all of those really well. And so even if you were going to go to a single vendor and you want to do all of this sort of stuff, then you're really looking at potentially utilizing multiple tools. But here's a good example of two vendors that often go head-to-head. Silverpop, now part of IBM, the exact target for some time, loosely part of the Salesforce Federation. And what is it that they're actually good at? And you can see that although these two kind of compete head-to-head, they tend to have somewhat different emphases. And so the key here is to really sort of understand what is it that a particular platform is good at, what is it not good at, and then lining that up against your specific needs. Now, this is high-level business needs, but I'm going to suggest a little bit later that you actually drill down and identify particular journeys, marketing journeys, customer journeys, and use that as the basis for how you're actually going to select. So, when you get into this, you also discover there's a lot of other issues. One in particular that we found among our customer base is scale, right? So it's one thing to be able to have all these sorts of capabilities, but can you actually scale across the needs of a large enterprise, which may have multiple different product lines, multiple different marketing teams, multiple different geographies, so on and so forth, all with their own sorts of campaigns, all with their own assets and information, all with their own different users who may need different access control and that sort of thing. And so this starts getting really tricky. And this is often where you separate some of the mid-market from the more higher-end solutions is, can they actually scale across this? But even some of the more higher-end solutions sometimes have very trivial things like around access control models, which may be very light and may not adhere well to the strictures that you need to have around preventing certain people from having access to certain lists or content, within your marketing team as you distribute it globally. So, one of the big things that we often tell people is, don't imagine what working in the system is going to look like on day one, because it always looks clean and interesting and fresh. Ask yourself, what is it going to look like on day 365, where maybe across our enterprise we've run 500 different campaigns. Am I going to be able to call up the spring campaign from 2017 now that I want to try to redo it in 2018? And can I find the assets? Can I find the data around how it actually worked and everything? And so that's really a big part of testing these tools, is actually simulating a number of different campaigns and loading in a lot of dummy content and information to really sort of understand what's the actual user experience once I'm actually using this in a real environment, as opposed to just sort of a demo environment. Now, there's another issue here when it comes to selecting these tools that frequently comes up, is that the major players all claim to have a variety of different clouds: marketing clouds, experience clouds, digital experience platform clouds, so on and so forth. And this is very tempting as a customer to just say, look, I'm going to just sort of hand myself over to Salesforce and have them take care of this all for me. And it's very appealing from a variety of different perspectives. You would hope that maybe the experience is going to be better integrated, and that you'd be able to reuse some of your both technical and business resources across different platforms and so on and so forth. In the real world, it almost never works out that way. In almost every case, these tools have all been built through acquisition. It's a whole kaleidoscope of different technologies and user experiences underneath the covers. Even within Salesforce, it's often very different technology sets, say, between ExactTarget and Pardot. And so it's almost like you're working with different vendors after all. So you want to be really careful not to compromise the capabilities that your business teams need by just going by default with a single vendor. And the vendors themselves will claim, till they're blue in the face, that they have X number of customers who license across their entire suite. But the reality is that for most of these players, the vast majority of their customers only license one or two products, right? It's kind of a myth that people are buying these fully integrated cross-functional sort of suites. And so, if it happens that IBM works for you across multiple different tools, that's great, but that's likely to be more of a coincidence than not, right? So don't be this guy. Don't say, okay, we're going to use the Salesforce Marketing Cloud just because we like the Salesforce Service Cloud, right? You have to really take each layer in your stack and approach it individually in terms of what is it that you're going to need. Now, to be sure, this means you're going to have integration challenges, but the reality is everybody has integration challenges. So that's another core competency that we have to have as MarTech people, is to be able to build a proper architecture where we can plug in particularly to some sort of a data platform underneath, so that we can actually take different tools from different vendors and have them work off a similar data set. And so the reality is that even if you get multiple tools from the same vendor, you're still going to have to work hard to integrate them anyway. So integration is just something that we all have to continue to get good at and to have as a core competency along with selecting tools. And the key thing there is really architectural separation of concerns. And some of our smartest subscribers have really done some intelligent things around separating data and orchestration and experience and delivery. And if you want any more about that, you can feel free to ask any questions. And just to reiterate what Scott said, feel free to use the questions tab in your GoToWebinar control panel if there's anything you agree with, disagree with, anything that you want questions or want to hear more about. Okay, now I'll talk about, that's a little bit on the marketplace, some of the things to think about, a general overall approach. Now let's get more specific around what's the best way to actually select these tools. And we've built a methodology over the last 18 years now that's really of trying to apply design thinking to technology selection. In other words, to make it a little bit less waterfall and much more agile-like, which means that it's based on team-based, it's test-oriented, you iterate and you adapt as you go along and you learn more about the potential fit for a particular tool. So as opposed to starting way out front and make sure you have the perfect requirements and documenting them all in Excel and then going out and doing this rushed, matrix against all these different vendors, you instead kind of bite it off in different chunks and make it a lot more test-based, a lot more hands-on, a lot more real. So my colleague Jared and I actually wrote a book about this called The Right Way to Select Technology from Rosenfeld Media. And so if you're a book reader, you can get all kinds of examples there, and basically it's a whole cookbook to doing this right. But let me distill it down for you really quickly. First, you want to build an interdisciplinary selection team. It should be led by a business stakeholder, ideally a digital marketing lead, but you want to definitely have IT stakeholders on board, including security, systems, and obviously developers, and then potentially the wide swath of stakeholders on the business side who really care about this. So you build an interdisciplinary selection team first and foremost. Don't default to one department or another, just making the choice for the entire enterprise. And you want to take an agile approach where maybe you build a longest shortlist, maybe 10 to 12 vendors that might work for you. Of course, we sell research for a living, so we're big believers in research and using that to get to a short list of RFP recipients. We're still big believers in RFPs, but the key thing about the RFP is that it's not a series of checklists, but it's more a set of normative questions, and even more importantly, the heart and soul of the RFP are actual user journeys that you can test out. Then likewise, you go to vendor demos, you filter down from there, maybe invite 3 or 4 into day-long demos, again, your scripts, not their scripts. And then finally, most importantly, have a hands-on bake-off where you're actually hands-on with the technology before you buy it. And it amazes me how many people don't do this. But it's really essential to knowing that you've made the right choice. So let's dig into this a little bit more. In terms of shortlist considerations, of course, regions can matter, licensing models. Technology is less so as we move to the cloud, and I think that's been kind of a heartening thing. But if you're going to license, say, a complex platform from the likes of Adobe and IBM, you will be using developer resources. So you want to make sure that you know what sort of developer resources that you need. One of the things in our own evaluations that we focus on a lot as well now is the vendor product ecosystem. So this is, in fact, one of the axes that we have under strategic considerations in the quadrants that you can build using our tools is looking at it, okay, what's the scenario fit, but also what is the vendor and product fit from more of an ecosystem perspective. And in our experience, this can be a pretty significant differentiator from vendor to vendor. Then you want to go through a testable process. So you want to then boil down to a short list of RFP recipients. And again, we've got online tools that you can test out for free, as Scott mentioned, that can help you get there. But then you want to put together a real RFP. So not one of these kind of canned RFPs that you can see on the street or something generic someone else has created for you. And what makes it real is that you get rid of these sort of do you do this, do you do that sort of questions. The vendors have seen all of these. They can check all the boxes. What you really want is to develop actual user stories. And those users could be your own marketing teams, your own developers, certainly your customer journeys. So you want to encapsulate those as to be business objectives and business stories that then the vendor has to respond to, first in writing and then during the demos. And then they're actually showing you how to impersonate these players and do it yourself during the actual bake-off. So this is really the heart and soul of what you want to develop. Obviously, there's part art, part science to it. We've helped nearly all of our subscribers work through these. We've got various samples that we give out as well as examples that you can base off of. But this way of encapsulating your requirements is definitely the more modern way to do it and much more effective because it's much more real. And it helps you differentiate very quickly what system wants to do what. Then you want to boil down to 2 finalists. And here again, you have real scenarios, real content and data, your real people, ideally the real environment, so you're working in some test instance of their cloud. This gives you more time also to negotiate fees, right? So negotiating iteratively like everything else is also your friend. This could be labor intensive, but if you think about what's the cost of sales implementation, then that should meter it, right? So if this is a really core system for you, like let's say it's an entirely new marketing automation or ESP for your outbound marketing, then you want to spend at least a week long with each vendor. If it's something a little bit smaller, like a creative operations management or a content marketing platform or some kind of an attribution system, maybe just a day will do, right? That you actually have a day-long bake-off where you get trained in the morning, your hands-on in the afternoon, and you're convincing yourself with your own content, your own information, your own data, hey, this is working for me or not, right? So it's a question of how mission critical is this, and use that to actually meter how involved the bake-off is. Okay, so if you're interested to learn more about the pros and cons of these different vendors, feel free to download a sample of our campaign and lead management technology, along with other research that we have on digital asset management, WCM, CRM, so on and so forth. And let us know if you have any questions. Similarly, I've seen some questions come in already in the GoToWebinar control panel. If you have any other questions yourselves or any comments, anything you disagree with, feel free to chime in there. And I'll go ahead and take a look at those while Scott talks about potential next steps.
Great, thanks, Tony. And yes, we certainly do invite you to ask any questions that you might have or provide any feedback from today's presentation. Do want to mention that next week we'll be hosting a somewhat type session, but our focus will be on CRM technology, all part of our digital marketing technology suite of research, which as Tony mentioned, includes things like digital asset management and web content management. We encourage you to download research excerpts from our site, try out the tools such as Real Quadrant and Real Time that you can take a look at on a complimentary basis. But if you want to see more of a behind the scenes tour of what's included with the Real Story Group research subscription, just hit us up on the email address listed on the screen here, and I'd be happy to walk you through that type of a tour. With that, Tony, looks like there's a question or two in the queue.
Yeah, definitely. One question from James: who do you normally work with, directly with clients or more with consultants? So about, the vast majority of our subscribers are end user enterprises, particularly larger enterprises. There are other systems integration agencies and consultancies also license our research for their own purposes. They'll use it to help their own clients with product evaluations and that sort of thing as well. The one group that we don't work with or advise ever, as Scott mentioned earlier, is vendors. We never advise vendors, we never consult with them, we never help them out. We consider that a conflict of interest. And I think we're actually unique in the analyst world of being totally on the buy side like that. Karen's asking a really interesting question. She says, I work in IT and I agree with you about these mega suites. I'm getting pressure from my business stakeholders to go straight across the board Adobe. I don't think this is a good long-term choice. Help me here in this situation. Well, Karen, we hear that a lot. I had that funny slide about Salesforce. Certainly, it's often the case with Adobe that people tend to sort of fall in love with the idea of Adobe, which is it can happen with, and Adobe obviously is very good at this in terms of selling up the chain and trying to tell your executives that a strategic relationship with them will be more beneficial than making more tactical sort of purchases. And I think I would refer you back to something that hopefully your marketing team is really familiar with, which is this whole idea of helping them develop a set of journeys. So these would be both marketer journeys, creative journeys, customer journeys, and really documenting those in narrative format, and then bringing Adobe and competitors in to actually execute on those journeys. And that's where you'll find, just how easy was this to use or not? Just how much did we satisfy what we're trying to do? How many different interfaces and how many different products did I have to license to be able to do what I want to do with respect to multi-channel engagement? And to the extent that I've got to license multiple products from Adobe or anyone else, you know, what does this mean for our own user experience? Are we constantly toggling among tools? How are they integrated? You know, and is it just an invitation to license even more technology, so on and so forth. So getting real about this as opposed to having these sort of abstract discussions is totally the way to go, Karen, and these kind of narrative journeys are the way to get there. So James has a follow-up. This is around partnering with agencies or consultancies to work directly with clients, and certainly we've done that before, James. I'm happy to have a conversation with you on that. And then Melissa is asking, where is Microsoft in all this? And that is a great question. Microsoft has gone kind of mysteriously AWOL on a lot of marketing and engagement-oriented business opportunities, and this has been a bit of a mystery to us. I think that Microsoft has always been much more comfortable in, you know, workplace tools and workplace-based, employee-facing settings. You know, the dynamic CRM is still a really important player on this landscape, and we've had certainly subscribers of ours who've gone through selection processes where Dynamics beat out the likes of Oracle and Salesforce and others. But in terms of some of the marketing capabilities that originally were built on top of or next to Dynamics, those have been largely sunset. Hopefully, I believe Microsoft is in the process of kind of rethinking that and maybe putting those out. In the meantime, they push their customer base through an Adobe partnership to really look at Adobe tools. I think that's a bit of a mismatch because Adobe is often the most complicated, the most expensive, the most developer-intensive type solutions on the market, and so not always a good fit for everybody who's a Dynamics licensee or part of the broader, you know, Microsoft ecosystem. So Microsoft is mysteriously a little AWOL, though I suspect by the end of this year that story will have evolved. Okay, so I believe we've reached the bottom of the half hour, and it's really great connecting up with everyone again today. Hope you found this useful. Feel free to reach out to us at any time if we can be useful to you in any way. If you're interested in the CRM marketplace, feel free to, as Scott mentioned, to join us again next week. But in the meantime, this is Tony Byrne and Scott Dill for Real Story Group signing off. Thanks again. Bye now.